Somewhere inside Recoleta Cemetery, there's a coffin with fingernail marks scratched into the inside of the lid. The woman who made them had already been pronounced dead by 3 separate doctors. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how that happened and why, decades later, coffins started shipping with bells attached. It's past midnight in Buenos Aires, 1902. Rows of marble mausoleums sit in perfect silence, the kind of silence that feels expensive. This is where the city buries its wealthiest families, angels carved in stone, iron gates, names that once meant something. Then, a sound, low, deliberate, coming from inside a tomb that was sealed shut earlier that same day. The cemetery's night watchman stops walking. He tells himself it's rats. It's the wind. It's nothing. Rats don't sound like that. And wind doesn't pause between sounds, almost like it's listening back. He does not open the tomb that night. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he told himself a story he could live with, the same way most of us do when the truth would cost too much to face. He will regret that decision for the rest of his life. The girl. Her name was Rufina Cambaceres, 19 years old, the only heir to one of the largest fortunes in Argentina, cattle money, old money, the kind of wealth that built the mausoleum she was about to be buried in. Her father, Eugenio, had been a celebrated writer with a seat at the table of Argentine high society. He died when Rufina was only 4, which meant she grew up as the sole heir to everything: the name, the estate, the expectations that come with being the last person carrying a family's reputation on her shoulders. By 19, she was known across Buenos Aires simply for being beautiful, cultured, and impossibly well-connected. The kind of young woman other families pointed to as proof that money and grace could exist in the same room. But underneath the reputation was just a girl, about to turn 19, excited for one night to be looked at and admired instead of measured. On the night of her birthday, her mother threw her an extravagant party, the kind Buenos Aires society still talked about decades later. Music, champagne, a house full of people who wanted to be seen standing close to the Cambaceres name. By all accounts, Rufina spent that night the way most 19-year-olds would if the whole city was watching, laughing a little too loud, dancing a little too long, soaking up an evening that was supposed to be entirely hers. Somewhere in that house, surrounded by people smiling back at her, was someone who already knew something was about to break. Afterward, the plan was simple. Get dressed and head to the Teatro Colón, the most prestigious opera house in South America, to be seen one more time before the night ended. She never made it out the door. The collapse. While getting ready in her bedroom, Rufina collapsed. No warning, no prior illness anyone spoke of publicly. One moment she was fixing her hair, deciding which jewelry to wear. The next, she was on the floor, unresponsive. Doctors were called immediately, and this is where the story starts to unsettle. Not one doctor, 3. 3 separate physicians examined Rufina's body, and all 3 agreed. She was dead. No pulse, no breath, no visible sign of life. 3 trained professionals arriving independently at the same conclusion. That should be reassuring. 3 confirmations instead of 1. But what if 3 doctors agreeing wasn't 3 times the certainty? What if it was just 3 men, trained the same way, using the same limited tools, all capable of making the exact same mistake? In 1902, that mistake was disturbingly easy to make. There was no advanced equipment, no modern method of confirming death beyond a doctor's trained eye and a held breath under the nose. If 3 doctors agreed, the family had no reason to question it. Grief doesn't usually leave room for a second opinion. There's a detail that rarely makes it into the short version of this story. Rufina was buried the very next day. Not a week later. Not after a formal viewing period, which was common even then. The next day, dressed in her finest clothing, wearing her favorite jewelry, sealed into an ornate family mausoleum built to reflect exactly how much the Cambaceres name was worth. Why the rush? Some versions of this story point to something else happening that night entirely. That Rufina had just learned, at her own birthday party, that her mother was involved with her boyfriend. That the shock of the betrayal is what put her on the floor in the first place. Her mother, some accounts suggest, had her own reasons to want the situation handled quickly and quietly. Handled. That's the word that keeps surfacing in accounts of that week. Not mourned. Handled. We don't know for certain which version is true. What we do know is this. Everything about Rufina's death moved fast. Almost too fast for a family with that much money, that much status, and supposedly that much love for the girl they were burying. The second death. The night after the burial, the cemetery caretaker heard something coming from inside the Cambaceres family vault. Not wind, not settling stone. A sound like something, or someone, was moving. He didn't investigate that night either. Just like the watchman before him, he made the same quiet decision to not look closer. By the time anyone returned to check, it was the following day. What they found stopped everyone who saw it. The coffin, placed neatly inside the vault less than 48 hours earlier, had shifted position. The lid, sealed shut just 2 days before, was cracked and pushed partially open. Their first assumption was grave robbery. It happened. Jewelry buried with the wealthy made for an obvious target, and Rufina had been buried wearing hers. But when they opened the coffin fully, the jewelry was still there, untouched. Rufina was not. Her body had shifted inside the casket. Her hands were bruised and torn. Her face bore scratches, and along the interior of the coffin lid, the same marks we opened this video with, deep, frantic gouges, the kind that could only have been made by fingernails clawing against solid wood from the inside. Rufina Cambaceres had not been dead when she was sealed into that tomb. She had woken up, in the dark, underground, inside a box built for a corpse, still wearing the same dress from her 19th birthday party, with no way out and no one who could hear her scream. Think about that for a second. Not the horror of it, the physics of it. A wooden box, a few inches of air, and a mind that is fully, terrifyingly awake, while everyone who loves you believes you're already gone. The medical explanation given afterward was catalepsy, a condition that can mimic death almost perfectly. Slowed heartbeat, shallow, undetectable breathing, rigid muscles. To 3 doctors working with nothing but their hands and their ears, a body in catalepsy can look, sound, and feel exactly like a corpse. Rufina had likely been in exactly that state when she was pronounced dead, dressed, and buried, and at some point, hours or days later, sealed in complete darkness. She woke up. What followed her, in that coffin, was not a fall or an illness. It was time. Minutes turning into hours, spent clawing at solid wood with nowhere to go, until her body simply gave out from exhaustion, terror, and lack of air. She died a second time. This time, for real. The unanswered question. To this day, nobody can say with certainty what actually happened inside that tomb. The catalepsy theory is the most widely accepted, a medical explanation for a death that looked identical to 100 other symptoms, doctors of the era simply couldn't distinguish. But it isn't the only theory. Some point to the jewelry left untouched as proof this wasn't a break-in gone wrong, but something closer to negligence. A burial rushed through so quickly that nobody paused to double-check what 3 confident doctors had already agreed on. Others still point back to that birthday party, to a mother with something to hide, to a burial that happened one day after collapse, with almost no time for anyone to ask the questions that, in hindsight, seem obvious. Here's what we do know for certain, and it's the reason we opened this video the way we did. Stories like Rufina's weren't as rare as we'd like to believe. In the decades that followed, safety coffins became an actual product people paid for. Coffins fitted with bells, breathing tubes, even small flags that could be triggered from inside, just in case. Not because of superstition, because enough families had opened a coffin and found exactly what the Cambaceres family found. That should tell you something about how many Rufinas there might have been, whose names nobody ever bothered to write down. We may never know which version of her story is the true one. What we do know is carved in stone in Recoleta Cemetery today. A life-sized statue of Rufina, one hand resting on the door of her own mausoleum, forever caught in that same unanswered moment. Not quite escaping, not quite resting either. Tourists walk past it daily, most without knowing her story. Locals call her the girl who died twice, for a few hours in the dark inside a coffin built for a corpse, with only her own fingernails and a silence nobody was coming to break. Rufina Cambaceres found out that being pronounced dead and actually being dead are not always the same thing. And that question we opened this video with, the one that sounds almost too simple to matter, is the one Rufina Cambaceres answers better than almost anyone in recorded history. Are you really dead when you're dead?